Welcome, everybody. We are on episode 6 of the Leader You're Becoming podcast. I am your host, Coach T, and I am excited that you're back here. Oh, man, I'm so excited because we're about to talk about one of my favorite books. Oh, my goodness. This book, I would say, easily changed the trajectory of my leadership. And so that's going to be the core thesis of this episode. Again, this is the Leader You're Becoming podcast, where we talk about leadership, stewardship, which we'll dig into today quite a bit, and ultimately how to create a work environment that people love to come to every day and they don't hate to come to work. It is possible. It is possible. So I'm excited that you're here. Hopefully you're having a fantastic day, a fantastic week, a fantastic month, and I'm just excited. So without any further ado, let's get rocking and rolling here today. And so I always like to start with a topic, right, or a title, if you will, of our topic for today, which is going to be when leadership success becomes the ceiling. I'll say it again. When leadership success becomes the ceiling. Now, this sounds a little bit like an oxymoron, of which is like we have success, but now that success is the ceiling. How is that possible? And one of my favorite books that dives into this very deeply, and I think it's arguably one of the best books around this topic of like growth as a leader and understanding the things that got you to one place, promotion, leadership position, etc., can actually be the very thing that prevents you from moving forward. And it's not about working harder. It's not about, working longer, the more hours. It's not about becoming more efficient. And all those things may be a result, but it's not about specifically that. What it's about is your identity and understanding the things and the behaviors and how you view yourself, that identity as a leader, which we talk about a lot, how it can prevent you from actually getting to that next level. And so without further ado, that book is called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. Perfectly stated, right? What got you here won't get you there, which is by Marshall Goldsmith. Again, that's Marshall Goldsmith. What got you here won't get you there. And Marshall, if you don't know anything about him, he at one point in time was considered the number one business consultant in the world. He had the number one leadership program in the world. I think he had two, if I'm not mistaken, but for sure, the one book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, New York Times best-selling business book in the world, or leadership book in the world. So this guy knows what he's talking about, and if you look him up, Marshall Goldsmith, super easy name, he has tons of resources online for free. All right, that was one of his, one of his uniqueness, parts of him being unique was he wasn't trying to sell you every single thing, right? He had a ton of information online for you to go through. And the cool thing about it, in a lot of his videos, he'll tell you you can use it, reproduce it, print it, because he just cares about leaders getting better. And in a lot of ways, that's how I operate, and I align with that in so many ways, which is like, look, at the end of the day, if you really care about everybody getting better, then some things, it just doesn't matter. It's free. It's yours. The execution of it, may take some time, may take some additional coaching, but at the end of the day, it's available because truly the heart is people to get better. And so that's what this podcast is about. And so this lines up perfectly with this book and a topic, which is like when that ceiling, your success as a leader becomes your ceiling. And so, this book, I read this book when I first became a general manager of a new dealership, not a new company, but a new dealership in a brand new market. And it was busy, yo. I mean, it was rocking. I mean, they thought, oh, we were only going to sell, maybe 30, 40 cars. We ended up selling like 110 the first month. And trying to keep up with inventory, the amount of staff we had, was not enough to keep up with the demand. And there was a lot of things that I had to evaluate through the development of that dealership to take it from what we thought it was going to be from introduction to where it ended up being, and then taking it saying, okay, it's here. How do I move it up to that next level? And I read this book, and it totally opened my mind to understand who I was to get to that general manager position was not the same man, if you will, or in the same version of that man that would be okay with the volume at which we were working in based on the expectations that were set. And then to say, okay, well, we're having success now, it's going to have to be a different version of this man this leader, in order for the dealership to continue to have the hockey stick trajectory that we would want to have within the marketplace. And that really gave me a sense of like understanding of two things can be true at the same time, which is, number one, you can have success and be doing the things that are causing success, and have one foot here in success and have another foot in I'm still an unfinished product. Right? Now that sounds really simple, right? From a theory standpoint, or just having this conversation on this podcast, which is like, yeah, of course, nobody's perfect, but I can promise you, if you really, and I will challenge you to look at the things that you have the most success in. And I would challenge you to look in the mirror and really truly evaluate and say, oh yeah, I'm still actively trying to get better at that. I'm still assessing myself in that particular situation. Oftentimes, you might be one of the exceptional ones. You might be one of the ones that has this perfectly in a line. And guess what? Well, this podcast probably won't be the most valuable to you, or it may just be a reminder. But for everybody else, like myself, we can become victims to our success. The very thing that caused us to get that promotion is not the very thing to be successful in that new role, right? You see this a lot with some of the best salespeople. Salespeople are great. They're really good. They can sell. They can go out there, sell $1 million a month, $10 million a month, whatever it might be, 100,000, depending on your industry, your market, whatnot. And then they get into a leadership position, and it's easy for the outside world to assume like, okay, well, they're in this leadership position now, and they can sell really well. Now they can go ahead and train all these other people to sell really well. And now they just duplicate themselves. You hear that a lot, right? They'll just duplicate themselves. But then you put them in that position and they actually don't have good leadership skills. They don't have communication skills. Their sales process isn't actually duplicatable because it's very unique to how they do based on their personality, right? Or how they navigate a situation. And they can't duplicate that because other people aren't made up of the same ingredients exactly, or put together in the exact same manner, right? And so now they struggle, not because they weren't good, but because there's a different skill set and a different rhythm as a leader of salespeople compared to being a salesperson, right? And that's just an easy example where I've seen personally, and in promoting leaders of, that doesn't always translate, right? And then when you get there, you have to be willing to say, yes, I was exceptional at sales. And now I need to be an exceptional leader of salespeople, right? And being able to understand the two without feeling disappointed that you went from being really good and now you're back down here, right? Based on the role that you are, but understanding that I can be really good here and I can help and teach people on some tactical tools and situations because I did it myself as a salesperson, but then also come along and say, hey, there's a gap here that I need to get to, as far as being able to how to communicate that, how to build systems around it, how to create structure, and how to motivate people to produce how I produce, or even better, exceed me based on their talent and ingredients that they are made up of. And so that's one of those things that is extremely difficult as a leader, and a trap, and why I wanted to have this episode, because that success that you had, even as a leader, right, can become your ceiling. It can become your ceiling. So what starts to happen, right? I got my notes. I like my notes here, right? What starts to happen, right, is you start to have a situation where that leader in person who's had success starts to, I don't want to say, they stop growing. I'm trying to come up with a very eloquent way of saying it, but I'm just going to keep it 100 because we try to keep it authentic. We are going to keep it authentic on this podcast, which is like people just stop growing, right? Because it's working. It's going well. And so what happens is that you end up in a place where you start defending. Well, that's not how we used to do it. Anybody ever heard that before? That's not how we used to do it. Or that's not, what I would do. And we end up in this weird trap where we start defending what worked. But the data today is suggesting that working harder at the thing that once worked may not be the answer. Sometimes it might be. Sometimes it might be, hey, we just actually need to put more volume into it. But then a good leader looks in the mirror and says, okay, how we're doing this, how I'm viewing this, is this the right way to go? I might be very quick before early on, let's use for an example, early on in building out a process, I might be very hands-on. I mean, very hands-on. I mean, micromanagement style hands-on. Why? Because it's a brand new process. It's a brand new process that we're still trying to figure out, work out all the bugs and the kinks and everything else about this process. People don't know it. We're learning as we go. And so I am very, very closely tied into the success of this process. And my voice carries a lot of weight in it, even though I have another leader, but we're still building it together. But at some point in time, for that process to really be able to scale, I may have to get off. I may have to loosen the grip some. I may have to say, okay, I'm not here anymore, or I'm not here anymore. And then I could just start to take my hands off, take my hands out of it. I used to have a boss, I say it often, that taught us. He said, hands in everything as a general manager. No, excuse me. Hands in nothing, fingertips in everything. Fingertips in everything, hands in nothing. Meaning you have so much stuff going on. You can keep a pulse, fingertips, on every single thing. But your hands don't really need to be in anything unless it really needs some movement and you really got to get in there, build out new processes, maybe replace the leader, etc. You can go ahead at that point in time. But fingertips in everything, hands in nothing. And this is just one of those pure examples of, as a leader, your ability to micromanage something, put your hands on and get in there and do all the work is no longer required at some points in time. And the question is, the belief system is, are you willing to understand and take into account the self-assessment to know that I need to assess myself? I need to assess, am I living the right type of way? Do I have the right habits and or belief system around this particular situation? And that's hard because, it's hard to question yourself, especially when it's working, right? And there's often times where we're like, double down. And there is moments where that is true. And a lot of times that is true. I don't want anybody to get it misconstrued here. If it's working, keep working. And understand that if it's working, you're going to max it out. And then you got to still keep your eye around, how can it get better? Or how do I get better to produce the same result, right? In this particular thing. So something to really pay attention to as a leader. Now, when you think about this, right? I give an illustration, right? Think about if you're on a ladder, and in the book he talks about the cover of the book is a man or a person climbing up a ladder, and they're climbing up this ladder, and it's a gap between the ladder. And it was a beautiful visual, for me, it's like, in order to keep going and moving up, there is a gap. But then also, in order to move up, you have to have two things that happen. You have to have one foot still on the wrong where you were, and then you have to take the next foot and take a step up. Then you can let go of the next, you can let go, not let go of the ladder, but now you can take the next step up and move yourself up this ladder. And so this is just one of those things where in leadership, the two things have to be true. If you keep both feet where you are, you're not going to move. You have to stay where you are and take that unbalanced, kind of nerve-wracking step to say, I need to get to this next area, right? I need to get to this next area, and then the next area, and then the next area, and you continue to go and continue to grow. But if you don't take those chances, if you just sit back in your success and never change and never evolve and never continue to try to get better, even when it's working, you are going to get stuck, and your success will actually become your ceiling, right? We hear about it all the time with I'm a huge Dallas Cowboys fan, right? Now some of you might be turning it off right now, but hear me out. I'm a huge Cowboys fan. And one of the things I will say, personally as a fan, I don't just look at like the play on the field. That's important. I look at mannerisms. I try to pay attention to what's said or what's not said by Jerry Jones, the owner, who's also the general manager, who also feels like the coach. There's a lot of things that go along with that, right? But even in that nuance, I really try to pay attention to, are the ingredients there to actually win a Super Bowl? And up until this point, it appears that the business of football is more, there's more growth and has been more development with the Cowboys, Jerry Jones, the owner, to have a successful football business, the business of football, compared to the success on the field, right? Now, that doesn't mean that everything is on the owner, Jerry Jones, the team owner, Jerry Jones, or anything of that nature, because the players got to play, right? And I was a player, so the players got to play. But at the same time, if you go and you look at the arc of, well, when they were winning, what's the difference? Well, the biggest difference was Jerry Jones had leaders where he had to take his hands off. He had to let Jimmy Johnson just coach and do his thing. And in doing so, and then he was the great owner at that time, right? And he said, okay, well, I'm going to draft. I'm going to do these things. I'll put the structure around it. You coach, and then boom, success, right? And whereas now it seems like he's way more involved in the situation, and you don't have the football success, but you do have the business success. And so this is where it's like, well, what game are you playing in your career? Right? Are you playing the game of self-promotion? You look good all the time, right? You look good all the time. People think you're the smartest person in the room. You come up with all the ideas. Everybody goes to you, and like you win the company, MVP, or the MVP of your region or market or whatever that might be. But then it bottlenecks. And then it looks like, oh, you're not successful. It's why? Because everything had to run through you in this example. Whereas now you can turn around and say, hey, you know what? I can let my hands go, and I can move in a different direction if that's what's necessary, because it could be the reverse. You could be a, hey, let my hands off of it type situation, and you got to actually get better at, hey, I need to be closer to this. It could be in reverse, right, to have the success. But are you willing to do those things in order to make it? Are you willing to take that next step up that ladder by letting go of where you used to be in order to strive to move up, right? It's the same thing with the garden. Right, we talk about a garden and how I fundamentally believe that business is nothing but a garden illustration, right? And a garden needs pruning, it needs space and maturity. Sometimes if you have a plant and you have it in a little pot, in order for that pot, that plant to continue to grow, the pot has to change. It needs some more space. Are you willing to get into a new pot? Are you willing to go through that shock of being pulled up from one and put into another pot? And it might be uncomfortable. You may have to reroot yourself. You may have to restabilize yourself a little bit, right? But it didn't change the height and the growth that you already had. You just have to restabilize in a new pot. But now in that new pot, you got more space to learn and to grow and expand and produce even greater. And that is the whole point of the book. The whole point of the book is understanding, how to do it. Now, the one key thing about the book here that I thought was very fascinating, it didn't talk about what more to do, right? You hear me talk about like getting better and some things to do, and then you also kind of hear me alluding to some things not to do. He gives some examples, within the book and within his teaching about some easy things managers could stop doing that will position them to have better success and continue to move up that ladder. Number one is saying no when you mean yes. For example, somebody comes and says, hey, Coach T, I had this great idea about this new book that I'm going to write about how leaders could, manage their team better in less time during their one-on-ones. And I'm like, no, that's a great idea, because why would I say no? right? Why would I say no there? What it does subconsciously to that individual, it says, no, I already knew that was a great idea. And I'm glad you came along for the ride with that idea. There's no reason whatsoever to say no when you mean yes. It can simply be, that is a great idea. Period. Moving on, right? Second thing one of the other things he talks about is not starting a sentence with no, but, or however. That but, it'll get you in a lot of trouble. Meaning, I gave an example, right? No, it's a great idea. Or a situation that I had with a leader, and this is my number two person, and we collaborate a lot. Like, we run the business together, making decisions. We talk through things, strategies, whether he's directly involved or I'm directly involved, really doesn't matter. We really work together in a collaborative way. And one of our core reasons why we're successful is we always listen to each other, right? It's like a marriage in a lot of ways, right? And I do believe leadership with your leaders is like mini marriages, if you will. You got to listen, got to work together, even if you don't agree. And we had a situation, and I was pretty done with having any other thoughts around or ideas around the direction I wanted to go. And that's fine as a leader. Sometimes you're just going to say, look, this is the direction we're going. And I didn't have a chance to talk to him, but I was pretty mind made up about the direction. He shared some thoughts. He agreed with the direction I wanted to go. We didn't agree on the time frame. And when he started to express his concern about the time frame in which I wanted to move, he was like, he was saying his part, and I was just like, no. And then I gave my reasons why. But that no at the beginning actually caused frustration on his end. It wasn't the commentary, it was the fact that I just started with no. I started that sentence with no. And then I gave my reason. Had I just took a moment and said, tell me more about what you're thinking. Help me understand how you landed on this. And we went through it. And afterwards I said, okay, I can see where we're misaligned. Would you mind if I share my thoughts about it? Then at that point, he's like, yeah. And I would have shared my thoughts, and I would have shared how I was resolute with this situation. And we would have been able to move on at that point in time. But because I started that sentence with no, it totally shut down everything else I had to say, even though my points were valid. Even if, hey, your points are valid, I understand why you want to do it this way, but the fact that I said no, even in a relationship that we were tight, we're tight, and we worked through that, no still shut even that person down. So imagine the people that you aren't that close with, or you don't have that much collaboration with, or opportunities to collaborate with, or partner with, or work with, how much more impactful for them, and they don't even have the chance to give you the benefit of the doubt. So that's a great example. Another one within the book that I wanted to go over that he talks about is using no, but, and then ultimately always trying to add value. And this was a really weird, not gonna say weird one. It could sound weird to some people as a leader, because you're like, I want to add value. Of course I want to add value to everything that I do. But if you really think about it, think about the people you talk to that always has to add their idea to your idea, right? It becomes pretty self-centered. They often come off self-centered, or it almost comes off like they need to be the smartest person in the room, right? I've been there where I wasn't trying to be the smartest person in the room, but I was always trying to add value. But what happens is, every time you add value, and especially if you're the leader and they take your idea, it now became about you. And now it became your idea. So this overwhelming need to add value, sometimes it's just, that's a good idea. Period. Move on. That's a good idea. And I move on, right? And so just always trying to add value, or overjudge something, right? That's another one. Always trying to find, all right, well, I'm a leader, so how can I break this? How can I break this? Where can I find the point where this doesn't work? And there's nothing wrong generally. See, this is why it's a trap. Generally, with that. However, imagine every time you come to your boss and they always find something wrong with your idea. And then they double down on it by telling you how they would fix it. It's exhausting, right? I've been there before. I understand it, right? And oftentimes, sometimes we're trained like this as leaders. Sometimes we're trained with figure out a way to break this. How can we break it? What can be wrong about it? How can I make this better? Rather than sometimes just letting it be what it's going to be. Let them work through it. Just be more curious. Ask some questions. Oh, wow. What data led you down to this decision? Walk me through how you got here. Well, that's very interesting. That's a good perspective. All right, walk me through it. Or that's just interesting. Or what's your vision for this? Where do you see this going? Right? I had a leader, and they really wanted to have this conversation, with this other person, and they were all worked up about it, and they really, really wanted to get out their thoughts. And I asked them, we actually talked about it for like 30 minutes, how to prep for the conversation, we role played it, and then at the very end, I was like, I forgot a question. What do you want out of this situation? And it stopped them. And they said, I don't know what I want from this conversation. And then they went on to say, if I don't even have a result of what I would want to see out of this conversation, I probably shouldn't have this conversation right now, because I really just want to just vent. And I was like, okay, is the result that you would want to have is to feel good that you got a vent off towards this person? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, and they're like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have this conversation. I was like, sounds like a pretty good idea to me, but it's your choice. Right? And it's just this moment of just understanding, like what do you really want out of a situation, right? And just being able to take a step back to work through, to understand that. And it's not about more to do. Sometimes it's about what you can take off of it. And so those are just some of the tips. I highly recommend reading this book. And as always, I want to leave you with some questions to consider for this podcast, right? Number one, what behavior am I protecting because it once worked, right? What behavior am I protecting because it once worked? One of my behaviors was I was always trying to add new ideas. And it did work early on when we had that dealership and we didn't know what we were doing. So ideas were needed just to survive. There were times where we opened the dealership up and we had 5 cars on the lot. And a lot that held 125 cars. And we only had 5 cars. People thought we were going out of business. And we had so many people come in that day and we sold 11 cars when we started with 5. I can tell you how we did that in another day. But again, this is just adding value. It worked there, but then when we ended up on a lot with 300 cars on it, and then we had people who were senior, knew what to do, we had enough resources, always trying to add value while people were out there navigating and solving the different type of problems, was unbeneficial. All right, number 2, where am I standing too firmly instead of climbing intentionally? Right? What are you standing on? I know we have that fun saying, 10 toes down. Well, okay. There might be something you standing 10 toes down on that's actually holding you up from climbing. And then number 3, who might grow if I took less space? If I took up less space. Oh, that's a good one. Who might grow on your team if you took up less space? That's a good one right there. I'm gonna have to remember that one for myself, right? Who might be able to grow on your team right now if you took up less space? If you and your ego, I understand, your insight, your success, your ideas, your presence, your feedback, your feed forward, which the big book talks about, that's a whole nother podcast we'll do. If it just reduce some, who can grow around you? And guess what? If they grow, it'll get better. It doesn't always need you or me. It can just be them, with us supporting in the background, and it can actually be better. So with that being said, this has been episode number 6 of the Leader You're Becoming podcast. I really, truly, from the bottom of my heart, appreciate you, especially if you listen this far. Appreciate you for listening, tapping in. Please make sure you put your comments below. I love to hear your thoughts around it, maybe your thoughts around the book, the topic, about how our success can become our ceiling. And again, make sure make sure if this was valuable to you, share it with somebody, subscribe. I trust that you are smart enough to make a decision that this is valuable for you and you want to continue to get more content like this, and that there are some people out there that can benefit from this. This is, honestly, y'all, my heavenly work. This is my heavenly work, which is being able to help create and help others create environments where, from my perspective, God's children can flourish in their gifts that they were born with and their skills that they picked up along the way. So this is my heavenly work. So if you wouldn't mind sharing and spreading and being a part of that, thank you. And until next time, God bless.